And you're welcome to our very first segment, The Big Report, this morning, where we dive into the most significant policy developments shaping Nigerian economy. Today, we focus on the recently conducted public hearing on Nigeria's tax reform bills, a critical step in the federal government's ambitious plan to overhaul the nation's tax system. Now, the Senate's deliberations on these reform bills mark a pivotal movement in Nigeria's economic strategy as lawmakers, policymakers, and industry stakeholders debate measures aimed to expanding the tax net, also improving revenue collection and fostering a more business-friendly environment for Nigerians. Now, the central theme of the hearing was how Nigeria can leverage tax reforms to propel the economy toward the Senate's ambitious goal of a $1 trillion GDP. Key proposals included broadening the tax base, enhancing compliance mechanisms, and aligning taxation policies with global best practices. However, discussions also highlighted concerns from various stakeholders, including faith-based organizations like the NSCIA, which urged amendments to ensure tax policies align with religious and socio-economic sensitivities. Now, as the country grapples with revenue challenges, subsidy removal, and also inflation, the question remains, can tax reforms be the game changer for Nigeria's economic transformation? Our News Central's correspondent Idong Joseph was on ground and covered the event.
The tax reform debate has drawn mixed reactions, with stakeholders voicing both support and reservations.
The union opposes.
The Congress of University Academics, one of the groups that made submission, backed the need for reforms, but opposed the proposed increase in value-added tax, urging lawmakers to maintain the 7.5% rate, but instead expand the tax nets. The association also advocated for increased funding in the tertiary education sector.
Instead, it advocates for maintaining the current rate of 7.5% while expanding the VAT base to include additional taxable items that are not yet covered. This approach will prevent placing an additional financial burden on already impoverished Nigerians.
Other stakeholders, including the Nigerian Investment Promotion Council and the Association of Bureau de Change Operators, took turns to make their submission, raising concerns over the expected tax burden. The Bureau de Change Operators argued that excess taxes on licensed operators should be removed to prevent further strain on the forex markets.
Fear of generalization and multiplication of implication of the tax authority might extend their tax burden on licensed bureau de change as centralized by the regulated authorities.
Officials of the Nigerian Customs Service, highlighting issues within the free trade zones, noted that many operators fail to comply with regulations, raising concerns over revenue losses.
The sticky issue over the years has been the compliance of free trade zones operators with the provisions of the law.
Amid these concerns, the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms assured Nigerians that stakeholders' concerns will be carefully considered. And as the hearing wraps up, the chairman of the House Committee on Finance reaffirms its commitment to ensuring that the final tax reform legislation will reflect the interest of Nigerians.
Anything that you want us to provide data and the reasoning behind the provisions, will be ready to make those contributions.
As members, as elected members of the National Assembly, House of Reps especially, we assure you that we will do the needful to this bill and give Nigeria a law that, of course, represents the views of all Nigerians.
With the public hearing now ended, the debate over tax reforms continues, with businesses and citizens hoping that the new legislation will reflect the wishes of the public. In Abuja for News Central, Idong Joseph.
Now, to help us unpack these issues, we are joined by Sagir Ibrahim, News Central's correspondent, who's been closely following the Senate proceedings and, of course, will be giving us details about what happened. Sagir, you're welcome. Thank you very much. Good morning. Great to have you here again.
Good morning, Mazino. Good morning, Judith. Pleasure being on the breakfast show.
Good morning to you.
I mean, Sagir, you were also there besides yourself and Idong. Many thanks to Idong Joseph, by the way, for that report. You are also there as well. You've been our National Assembly correspondent. You covered the public hearing. I've been following this story. What were the biggest takeaways from the deliberations? And did you get a sense that lawmakers and stakeholders are aligned on the tax reform direction?
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Judith. I think it's best to start with a background. All of this started, of course, from then APC presidential candidate Bola Tinubu explaining and promising that if he becomes president, he will expand the nation's tax net. We saw following his swearing in as president, him, putting together a tax reform committee chaired, of course, by Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, the presidential committee chair on fiscal and, of course, tax reforms. That snowballed into, different assessment of the Nigeria's tax system, to revamp it with, of course, a major assignment to improve Nigeria's tax net. The government, of course, wants more money, and they believe that this is the only way they can do that if they are going to, of course, achieve the renewed hope agenda. In October, it was brought, of course, to the Senate and the House of Representatives as an executive bill. It scaled first reading, which then snowballed, of course, into reactions from different quarters in the society. Governors were, furious, especially some governors from the northern side who were saying this would affect us in ways that we cannot yet imagine. Some of them called for, a little bit of they called for the government, of course, the federal government, to pump its brakes. The president should not pass this so speedily because they feel that the repercussions might not be seen now, but much later in the future. However, in spite of all of it, some way, somehow, the bill passed second reading, and this led to the public hearing that we saw, take place throughout last week from Monday up until Friday. Now, during the public hearing, of course, everybody was given an opportunity, of invited stakeholders in this case as well, were given an opportunity to air their views and opinions on what they think of the tax reform bill. Of course, these are four bills: the tax administration bill, the tax bill itself, the joint tax bill, and finally the Nigeria Revenue Service bill, which, among other things, wants to repeal the FIRS and create a Nigeria Revenue Service, which would some way bring all of Nigeria's tax reforms, or all of Nigeria's taxing system, into one umbrella to ensure that it is effectively collected and the government effectively administers it. Indeed, that has been the situation, but then these stakeholders, have been quite vocal about certain sections, certain areas, certain lines in the bill that they've not been comfortable with. Some had said, well, especially some like the Iowa Consultative Forum, like the League of Northern Democrats, had particular issues with sections that had to do with inheritance tax. Now, they have been, they've put pressure consistently on and on and on in the 5 days that the public hearing has been on. However, the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Tax Reform had assured that there's no such provisions in the bill about inheritance tax. In fact, he went on to explain that anything relating to inheritance tax was inserted somewhere around 1979. But in 1999, that was also removed when, we had the new constitution, the 1999 constitution. Onwards, conversations went on and on and on about certain paragraphs or aspects of the tax reform bill which were ambiguous, in quotes, that needed a little bit, of clarification. But by and large, I would say, from what I had observed from Monday when it began up until Friday, when, the House of Representatives concluded its own public hearing on the tax reform bill, the lawmakers, which comprise, of course, of the Committee of Finance, did not so much aside listening to these contributions from members of the society, because that's supposed to be their job. Of course, their job is to work on the bill and provide a recommendation, to the House of Representatives. Likewise, the Senate Committee on Finance is supposed to collate all of these opinions from members and other stakeholders in the society, collate it, and then, have a holistic recommendation that they will bring on the floor of plenary while the bill is considered, to pass third reading. But by and large, it's been a seamless process. I would say that all of those who were invited had an opportunity to ventilate their concerns, and hopefully we hope indeed that we see something, or a bill that truly reflects the needs, the interest of Nigerians in this case.
Well, Sagir, ventilate their views, very, very true. But how about a common man? Was his view represented there at this reform I ask that because the $1 trillion GDP, it's very ambitious when you take a look at it. And to think that you can get all of that from taxes alone, of course, the Northern Elders Forum have also viewed their concerns. But were there other concerns while you were at the forum? Were there other concerns regarding how ambitious this plan is?
Well, yes, there were. And of course, individuals were given an opportunity to speak. It wasn't just groups themselves who spoke on behalf of others. I know I saw certain individuals, professors of taxation, professors of law, who came to give their 2 cents on the bill. Now, some of them had mentioned that, well, it's an ambitious bill. Yes, indeed it is. But, you know, increasing the tax base and increasing tax itself, it's not supposed to go pari passu. In fact, one had described it, you know, as a pedal, a bicycle pedal, where when one is up, the other should be down. So if you're planning on increasing the tax base, the plan should be, you know, to reduce the tax somewhat. Hence, this would allow, you know, for more people to be absorbed into the base, thereby the government generating, you know, more taxes. Now, this, of course, were some of the concerns. Others also raised issues, you know, around taxing the rich and providing some, you know, creating some provisions for what they described as luxury tax, because, you know, his particular argument was rich individuals in the society, as privileged as they are, can afford a lot, helicopter rides, you know, going on boat rides, you know, the procurement of luxury buildings, mansions, and the likes of that. All of these luxuries should come with a form of tax that should be paid to the government, and not a basket tax that all Nigerians should pay, including the rich and the poor, thereby creating unnecessary pressures for those who may not be able to afford it, and it looking like peanuts to those who can.
Well, I mean, that's really, I wanted to ask, is there a way forward in terms of alignment, right? You talked about how, you know, the lawmakers are doing this because the president, of course, has insisted, and he's very keen on, you know, increasing our taxation and in contribution to our GDP. But was there an alignment in there? Do you see a headway in these talks where it would come to fruition and everybody at the table is satisfied at the end of the day?
In legislative processes such as this, it's called a public hearing because members of the public are invited, so their concerns are heard. Now, for the case of alignment, well, only time can tell, because remember initially, the Nigerian governors had prevailed on the president to at least pump his brakes and allow for wider consultations so that more Nigerians are aware of what these bills entail. Remember, there are 4 bills. They are lumptious, they are large. It contains a lot of pages, which means that if Nigerians are going to read, of course, they would need some help, some professional help to grasp everything that's in the bill. But, you know, the president in his own wisdom had said, well, if anybody has an issue with the bill, then he should ventilate these issues in a public hearing. Now, the only thing that these lawmakers can do at this point is to invite members of the public to come and be heard. When they are heard, their memorandums that were submitted to this Committee on Finance will be collated. The Committee on Finance will then vet, you know, these memorandums, these recommendations, and they lump everything together and then submit back to plenary where it will be considered. Now, unfortunately, I cannot be able to tell you 100% that there's going to be some form of alignment. But what I can say is Nigerians have been given an opportunity to ventilate, and in this case, 5 days, 2 at the Senate and 3 at the House of Representatives. Anybody that has any issue about this bill has been given an opportunity to come out and say it. The members of the committee will then collate it and then provide any recommendations they have when they finally submit their report, and hopefully it is from there we will know whether Nigerians, you know, yearnings, Nigerians' concerns were actually considered when we see the bill either pass for 3rd reading or whatever outcome happens during plenary.
Then there's the issue of skepticism and poor accountability when it comes to the tax systems. And the question is how, or did they even consider discussing perhaps how they can make the public, individuals, businesses, trust the tax system more? Because currently, I can't say that people don't trust the system. Did they have any discussions on this, on how to bring people's trust back when it comes to the tax system that they're reforming?
Mazino, you know, initially when it comes to government or the leadership and the led, there's a huge trust deficit. And I believe the Senate president tried to address this issue on the very first day when, you know, he declared open the Senate public hearing on the tax reform bills. He mentioned that it's very important for Nigerians to read the bill, understand the bill, and also digest it. Of course, how that's going to be possible, well, we'll leave that for another time. But then, of course, there is mistrust. Of course, there are concerns because a majority of Nigerians really do not understand what the bill intends to achieve. It is only during forums or conversations like this that they get a glimpse of it. So what I can say is we can only hope that the National Assembly, you know, as the legislative arm of government, would do its job like the president of the Senate had promised. He said Nigerians' own is to understand, come out and raise concerns. Our job is then to ensure that the right thing is done in terms of implementation, and we hold government accountable should there be any breach. So it's only at this case that we can pray that the right thing is done and the government and the leadership stands truly by Nigerians who elected them there.
Speaking of Nigerians that elected them there, there's also the issue, I mean, when you come to Lagos, they are collecting bodies. It's fair for the SMEs, you know, the people who are hawk on the street, those who have stores, who have markets, even the taxi drivers, the keke driver, the kurupe drivers, they're all being taxed every single day, right? And this is on a federal, we're talking about federal now, but when coming to state, there's taxation that goes every single day, right? And although they tout this as, you know, for the good of the nation, contributing to GDP, it's been advised numerously over the years by the IMF, but unification of this taxation, did that conversation come out at the fore as well? Was there a conversation of unifying it to the grassroots level, you know?
Yeah. Yes, indeed, Judy. The conversation came up. In fact, before the bill even got to the National Assembly as an executive bill, I was during one of the interviews with the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Tax Reform, where he mentioned Nigeria was losing around 100 trillion or thereabouts, you know, to uncollected taxes. And then Nigerians were paying around between 50 to 60 different taxes, you know, on a daily basis. Now, it's all of this that, you know, occasioned the tax reform committee's work. Their job basically is to ensure that all of these different taxes that were paid, some of them, of course, pre-colonial, like you mentioned, had to be put together under one umbrella to ensure for seamless collection, the employment of technology in this case to collect, to track, and also to implement, you know, among other things. Of course, the state governments also had their concern. I recall the Kano state government had also come on to mention that, well, some of the provisions is going to impede on the rights of the state tax agencies to do their job. So you see, the state governments still aren't quiet, as well as others, you know, who joined the conversation to mention this. So yes, of course, it was brought up, and hopefully when the bill is passed, we'll see somewhat of a streamlining of these different taxes to ensure that maybe from 50 to 60, like he mentioned, it's reduced way drastically, where Nigerians do not really have to pay so many taxes, especially those doing business, you know, and then it looks like they are doing business on one hand and then the government is collecting with the other hand.
Right. I mean, so Sagir, many thanks for such insights and your perspective on this matter. As we're talking about taxation, can Lagos State also explain that consumption fee that they do at restaurants? Is killing me. But Sagir, many thanks for coming on. Appreciate you. Sagir Ibrahim, he's a National Assembly correspondent, who's giving us a bit of insight on the tax reform public hearing that happened all throughout this week. Sagir, once again, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.